Stephanie Bishop. I work for the South Sound Green Program and Thurston Conservation District, and we're out here at Boston Harbor Marina. This marina is just within the Deschutes watershed. So when you tested water quality along the Deschutes River, all of that water eventually ends up out here in this marine environment. And if you think that the water quality problems could affect salmon, those water quality problems also come down here and can affect the organisms that make their lives, that live in this marine environment. Because this is a working marina, Boston Harbor has these floats, which are basically styrofoam and wood that help the dock stay elevated. So when the tide comes in and out, they don't go underwater, they stay up and available so people can get out to their boats, they can get out to their research vessels, they can collect things like we're doing today. And they flipped this one over. It's probably been in the water for 10 or 20 years, maybe more. And in that time, all of these organisms have sort of colonized on this surface. In South Sound, where we are, the substrate or the soil, the dirt at the bottom of the water is really muddy. And so it's really hard for organisms like this to attach to. They like to cling to hard surfaces. So marinas are great places to come and see these subtidal organisms that live underwater all the time. I'll pull this close a little bit so you can see some of these organisms clinging to the float are stuck there with like a giant suction cup. So this here is called a plumose anemone. It's one of the largest anemones, and they come in different color morphs from dark orange to pink to white. Right now they're closed up. They're trying to conserve their water resources, and they're feeling a little bit stressed out because they're out of the water. When you see them in the water, they look like a giant mushroom kind of, or a giant cauliflower. Some of them are so stressed that they've started putting out little white stinging cells, little threads, and they're attempting to sting us, but they're not strong enough. The poisons or the toxins that they have within the plumose anemone are weak. They're mostly there for catching plankton and small little things in the water. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, and mussel colonies. So these mussels attach through the use of byssal threads. And these byssal threads are really, really strong and help the mussel stay put. And then from there, other organisms like these aggregating anemones start to attach to the shell. And they all of a sudden create this whole sort of like mini ecosystem within just the mussel shells. And even hiding in here, so some little crabs. They find their food and shelter within those mussel communities. See, some other things that are kind of cool that are tucked in here. There's some burrowing anemones, which is a relative of the sea star. And this one is pretty large, but he's really stuck in there. I'm not gonna bother him. We have got a chitin over here. There's a small chitin, which is like a kind of like a snail, marine, sort of like a snail. It sucks on with a suction cup. And then lots and lots of green algae. So this is both food and shelter for the organisms that live here. Stephanie, are most of the organisms filter feeders here? So the mussels are filter feeders. The anemones will use tentacles to sort of stun and take in small food, really tiny little, like larger plankton and really small things. What else we got? Oh, he's another one of those crabs. So he's more of like a primary consumer maybe, or maybe even eating detritus, so maybe like decomposer in a way, because he'll shred things up. His claws are very sharp. There's another little rabbit, which is a kind of a snail shell. There's barnacles on here. So talk about adaptations. Barnacles have super cool adaptations. They can close their door at low tide and then open it back up again at high tide. And they use their, basically it's their feet to comb the water for plankton. They start off as plankton, and then they drift through the water and they find a hard surface like this and glue their heads to the surface, and then their back feet become what they filter the water with. This is interesting. We found one of these. I guess is it a scale? Oh, it's a scale worm. It's just a very big one. Let me see again. This, I think, is another python. It's really on there. Yes! Oh my gosh, you guys, that was so cool. There's a fish getting eaten by an anemone over there, like a little fish. Did you see that right here?
Oh yeah.
You want to like jump over here?
Just so much diversity. Right. And they all live together. You know, they all kind of shrink, get rid of all that water, make themselves as small as possible. And there's those stinging cells. I didn't realize they had stinging cells. Yeah. Ah. So here are the marina pilings, and you can see the sea stars and the anemones, and of course all of the barnacle communities. Wow. Okay, do you see that adaptation of them closing up when they're out of the water? And then there would be ones that would be closer down. They're probably out feeding and living. So this is a sea star that we just pulled off the piling, and it's an ochre star. And if you feel the skin, it feels really rough. It looks slimy, but it's really rough and sort of like pokey. When you flip them over, you can see all these 5 rows of tube feet. And these tube feet help propel the sea star to look for food, to try to escape predators. And you can see they kind of each work independently. Little tiny suction cups. They also help move the food into this area here, which is where their stomach is located. And I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but sea stars will push their stomach outside of their bodies to digest their food and then bring it back inside. So what you're looking at, because this one we just pulled off a piling, it was eating barnacles, you can still see part of its clear stomach sort of sticking out here, and the barnacles stuck right in the middle. Working, and it's already there, starting to move. I wonder if they know that there are 2 of them in the bin.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Block. I'm a teacher, a science teacher at Camacho Middle School, and again we're out here at Boston Harbor Marina. And one of the really cool things that they've provided for us is that they have the floats that the boats for walking and for the boats to tie up to, so people can come out here. And one of the cool things to kind of think about is that we have these human structures that are out here, and how the organisms have adapted to live with these human structures. So on this float, as Stephanie had described a little bit earlier, is that we have these animals, and they've adapted so that when we pull this float out, they are able to survive out of the water for a time period. And those organisms, when the tide goes in and out, they're exposed for a portion of the day. And so if you think about it, we have like shells. So some organisms have shells, and the shells can close up and trap just enough oxygen and water in there to keep them in the habitat, in their kind of like micro habitat, so that they can survive outside of the water. And we have the anemones, and the anemones have closed up and they've trapped in water. And some of the things that I think are pretty cool, we have all of these organisms that are living symbiotically together. You know, they all have like a space. We have tube worms that are down here. They're adaptation. So when they're in the water, they actually come out of this tube and grab their food. And then when they're out of in the water, they go out. And then when they are pulled out of the water, they suck into this tube area. Okay. And then do you see this little thing right here? I don't know if you would know what these little guys are, but these are little tiny sponges. And so when you're looking at these, you can see just all the little tiny baby sponges, and then we have larger ones. So people a long time ago, they would go and actually harvest these and actually use them for sponges for cleaning. They have that same purpose, but I don't think you ever thought of a sponge being something alive. You might have thought about it as something that you get in the cleaning aisle at Fred Meyer, but they actually are an organism that lives out in the saltwater ecosystem. So I want you to be thinking about adaptations and how humans and all these organisms have magically come up with a way to live together. And we've talked about natural selection, and so how these organisms over time, they've come up with some type of genetic adaptation that has allowed them to live all together in this community.
Thank you, Mrs. Glock.
The feather duster tube worm makes a leathery tube that it can anchor tightly to pilings or to rocks, and then they can cluster together and have a bunch of them. When they're happy, their tentacles are out, they can be feeding, they might be bringing in oxygen that way, and they have sensors though, and if they detect a shadow that's a predator, they might suck themselves back in the tube.
Decorations on their back like this guy does, and they store toxins or sometimes stinging cells that they steal from sea anemones, and so that protects them from predators. And I found this in the algae right off Boston Harbor.
But you know what? The molting, you know how they molt? And that's why you actually see the dead bodies. And we'll see a lot of them now.